My father disowned me for loving a carpenter. He had no idea who he was really dealing with. My name is Elena Harrington. I am 31 years old, a senior financial analyst in Boston, and the only daughter of Richard Harrington, the man behind Harrington Capital, a $200 million real estate empire. 3 weeks ago, my father stood in front of 60 guests at his annual gala. Investors, city officials, family friends, every person who ever mattered to him, and disowned me. He looked at me across a room full of champagne flutes and silk ties and said, "From this moment, you are no longer a member of this family. Enjoy your poverty." 60 people heard it. My mother stared at the tablecloth. My brother smirked into his glass. The reason? I fell in love with a carpenter. A man who drove a beat-up truck and had debt from a failed first business. Or at least that is what my father thought he knew. But what none of them knew was that my grandmother had been keeping a secret since the day I was born. And that secret was about to change everything. Before I tell you what happened, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story resonates with you. Drop a comment telling me where you are watching from and what time it is there. Now, let me take you back to where it all started. I need you to understand something about the Harrington family. In my father's world, everything is a transaction. Every conversation, every relationship, every birthday dinner there is always a bottom line. And for as long as I can remember, I never hit his margins. I grew up in a 6-bedroom colonial in Brookline, the kind of house that looks warm from the outside, but runs cold on the inside. My father's study was on the first floor. Dark wood, leather chairs, a desk that weighed more than I did. When that door was closed, the whole house adjusted itself around it. I was 12, the first time I understood exactly where I stood. I would brought home my report card, straight A's, every subject. A handwritten note from my teacher, saying I was exceptionally gifted in mathematics. I ran into my father's study and held it out like a golden ticket. He took it, glanced at it for maybe 3 seconds, and set it down next to his bourbon. "Good," he said. "Now, go help Connor with his math. He is the one who will actually need it for the business." Connor was my younger brother, 8 years old. Already the heir, already getting private tutoring twice a week at $200 an hour, while I taught myself algebra from library books. That night, I drew a picture of our family standing in front of a building that said Harrington Capital on the front. I colored in the windows with yellow crayon to make them look like they were glowing. I stuck it on the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like the Statue of Liberty. 2 days later, I found it crumpled in the kitchen trash can. I kept it, smoothed it out on my bedroom floor, folded it carefully, and slipped it into a copy of Charlotte's Web on my shelf. I still have it. The creases have turned brown with age, but you can still see the yellow windows. Do you know that feeling? When you are a kid and you realize the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones keeping score? I was 22 when it happened again. And this time, it was worse, because this time, I was old enough to understand exactly what was happening. I had just graduated from the Wharton School of Business summa cum laude. Top of my cohort, 3 job offers waiting before I crossed the stage. My professors called me one of the most analytically gifted students in a decade. My capstone project on risk analysis won a departmental award. My mother cried during the ceremony. She sat in the 3rd row holding a bouquet of peonies from our garden, dabbing her eyes with a tissue she had folded into a perfect square. My father arrived 40 minutes late. I could see him in the back row, pacing near the exit sign. Phone pressed to his ear. He was closing a property deal in Somerville. When my name was called, when I walked across that stage, I looked for him. He wasn't watching. He was typing something on his phone with his thumb. Afterward, while other families popped bottles on the lawn, while fathers lifted daughters onto their shoulders and mothers pinned corsages, my father shook my hand, not a hug. A handshake, the same one he gives contractors. Good school. But Connor's starting at Harrington next month. That is what really matters. Connor didn't have a degree. He had a title, vice president, given, not earned. A corner office decorated with framed Celtics jerseys. They offered me a position too. Entry-level analyst, $62,000 a year. Reporting to my 20-year-old brother. I declined. Fine, my father said. Go play pretend somewhere else, so I did. I took a position at Ridley and Associates on State Street. Built my career from the ground floor. Earned every promotion, every client, every raise. And I stopped telling my father about any of it. But here's what set the stage for everything. I was 28. My father arranged an introduction to James Whitfield, the third son of his biggest real estate partner. The Whitfield Group managed commercial properties across Connecticut and Rhode Island. A merger between the families wasn't romantic. It was strategic. James was tall, Dartmouth educated, drove a Mercedes S-Class, and wore cufflinks that cost more than my rent. I dated him for 8 months. Not because I loved him, because saying no to my father felt like holding your breath underwater. James proposed at a family dinner. Il Toscano, Back Bay, private dining room, white orchids on every table, a 3-carat Tiffany ring. Everyone already smiling before I could open my mouth. My father had approved the ring. He had picked the restaurant. He would definitely picked the $200 Barolo. I asked for time. The table went cold. My father leaned forward, knife still in his right hand, and said, "Good people don't build empires, they get swallowed. James is your future, don't be stupid." I sent the ring back 2 weeks later. $85,000 in a FedEx envelope. My father didn't speak to me for 3 months. That is when the pattern became undeniable. Every achievement measured by its utility to Harrington Capital. Every milestone filtered through one question. What does this do for us? I wasn't a daughter. I was an asset. And by his metrics, an underperforming one. So I stopped performing. I stopped sharing, and I started saving every dollar I earned. Quietly, in a separate account at a bank he had never heard of. Here is the thing about golden cages: they are designed so well. You don't notice the bars until you try to move. At 31, I was earning $145,000 a year. I had saved $180,000 in a private account on Tremont Street. I was good at my job, promoted 3 times in 8 years. On paper, I was independent. But the apartment I lived in, a 1-bedroom on Beacon Hill, hardwood floors, exposed brick, owned by Harrington Capital. Lease signed by my father, rent, 0. The car I drove, silver Audi, a Fay, company vehicle, registered under the Harrington fleet. My health insurance, family plan, administered through my father's office. Every appointment filtered through a benefits coordinator named Sheila, who reported directly to him. He never said it out loud, but the message was woven into every brick and every insurance card in my wallet. You exist because I allow it. The worst part wasn't the dependency. It was how comfortable I would become inside it. It is easy to mistake a cage for a home when the cage has heated floors and a view of the common. I hadn't had a real relationship in 3 years. Every time a man showed interest, I measured him against my father's standards before I could stop myself. The voice in my head wasn't mine, it was his. My mother called me every Sunday at 4. Every Sunday she said some version of, "Your father loves you, Elena. He just shows it differently." She never once said he was wrong. That is the person I was when I walked into a friend's gallery, opening in Beacon Hill one Saturday evening in April, and saw a man with sawdust on his sleeves, carefully fitting a hand-carved walnut frame around a painting 3 times his size. His name was Caleb Mercer. 33, broad-shouldered, quiet. His hands were calloused, and his fingernails were clean. He smelled like cedar and linseed oil, and he spoke about wood grain the way my father spoke about profit margins, except Caleb actually loved what he was talking about. He drove a 12-year-old Ford pickup with a toolbox bolted to the bed. He wore boots with concrete dust on the soles. He asked me what I thought about the paintings. He never once asked what my father did. But I want to be honest with you. Caleb wasn't some fairy tale prince. His first business, a small furniture company he started at 25, had gone under $40,000 in debt. 2 years of rebuilding his credit. He had clawed his way back one commission at a time. One restored banister. One reclaimed mantelpiece. That failure haunted him. He still flinched when bank statements arrived. He still checked his credit score on the 1st of every month. And he carried something else. A kind of quiet shame about who he was in the world. His parents were working class. His father laid brick for 30 years. His mother taught third grade in Revere. Nobody in his family had ever been to a gala or shaken hands with a city councilman. He was proud of his hands, proud of his work, but he also knew how the world saw him and how men like my father saw him. We started seeing each other. Coffee, then dinner at a Thai place in Davis Square, where the tables wobbled, and the pad see ew was perfect. Then long walks through Cambridge, where he pointed out woodwork on old houses. See that cornice? Hand-carved, probably 1870s. You can tell by the asymmetry. Machine work is always too perfect. 3 months in, he hesitated, pulled back, stopped returning my calls for 4 days. When I finally confronted him, he sat across from me at his kitchen table, the one he had built from reclaimed oak, and said, "Elena, I looked up your father. Harrington Capital, $200 million. I rebuild old staircases for a living. I went bankrupt 3 years ago. What are we doing?" "Living," I told him. He looked at me for a long time. His jaw was tight. His hands were flat on the table. "I am not a project," he said quietly. "I don't need to be fixed or rescued." "Good," I said. "Neither do I." He nodded, and that was the beginning of something real, not perfect, not easy, but honest. We kept it quiet after that. Entirely outside the Harrington radius. For 6 months, Caleb was the only part of my life that belonged entirely to me. I had no idea that in 4 weeks, everything would crack open. Every October, my father hosts the Harrington Capital annual gala. 60 to 80 guests, black tie, open bar, a 5-minute speech about legacy he has been recycling since 2011. This year, the Liberty Hotel, Boston, Saturday evening, October 12th. I looked at my watch when we walked in, 8:47 p.m. I brought Caleb. No warning, no call ahead, no permission. For the first time in my life, I made a choice about my own life and didn't filter it through my father's approval. Caleb wore a clean navy suit, not designer, not tailored, just honest. His hands were calloused, no Rolex, no signet ring. He looked like a man who worked for a living, and he didn't apologize for it. I should tell you something about that moment, the walk from the parking lot to the entrance. Caleb stopped. Right there on the sidewalk, 10 feet from the door. "Elena." He looked at me. "I want you to know whatever happens in there. I am not going anywhere, but I also need you to know I am not doing this to prove anything to your father. I am doing this because you asked me to be here, I know." "Okay." He straightened his tie. "Let's go meet the family." We walked in together. My mother saw us first. Her champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. Connor nudged his girlfriend, whispered something. His smirk, the one I had grown up watching, slid into place. And then my father turned around. He was mid-handshake with someone from the mayor's office. His eyes traveled from Caleb's shoes to his hands to his face. No recognition, no warmth. "Elena." "Who is this?" "Dad. This is Caleb Mercer, my boyfriend." The room shifted, not loud, just a subtle drop in conversation. My father looked at Caleb's hands, looked at his suit, looked back at me. "Can I speak with you privately?" We stepped into the hallway near the coat check. He didn't wait for the door to close. "A carpenter." He said it like a diagnosis. "Are you trying to humiliate me?" "I am trying to live my life. Your life is this family. This company, this name. My life is mine." He stared at me, then walked back into the ballroom without another word. 20 minutes later, he stood up for his annual toast. The room settled. Glasses raised. The crystal chandelier above cast fractured light across every surface. He started the way he always does: Harrington Capital's legacy, the new developments, the company's bright future. His voice was smooth, rehearsed, confident. I had heard this speech a dozen times. It was always the same. Then he paused, set down his glass, and I felt the shift before I heard it, like the room took a collective breath. He looked directly at me. "This company was built on standards," he said. His voice had changed, colder, deliberate. "On knowing who belongs at the table. Tonight, I am reminded that not everyone in this room understands that. The air changed. 60 pairs of eyes turned toward me. I could feel them like heat. From this moment, you are no longer a member of this family. He paused. Let it land. Let the words settle into the silence like stones into water. Enjoy your poverty. Nobody moved. Champagne glasses frozen. My mother stared at the tablecloth, the same way she had stared at it for 30 years of dinners. Connor's smirk faded into something that almost looked like discomfort. Almost. He looked at his shoes. He didn't look at me. A woman at the second table, I later learned she was a family court judge, set her glass down and pressed her lips together. A man near the bar shook his head, almost imperceptibly. The mayor's aide excused himself to the hallway. The room didn't erupt, it froze. And somehow that was worse because silence, in a room of 60 people, is its own kind of verdict. I want you to know what I didn't do. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't throw a glass or storm out. I set my champagne down on the nearest table. Slowly, deliberately. A woman in a green dress at that table looked at me with something close to admiration. I looked at my father and said, in the steadiest voice I have ever used, "You just showed 60 people exactly who you are. Thank you for that." Then I took Caleb's hand, walked past the champagne table, past the coat check, past the gilded lobby and into the October air. Caleb didn't speak until we were in his truck, 2 blocks away, engine idling at a red light on Cambridge Street. "You okay?" he asked. "No," I said. "But I will be." Walking out of that room was the first step into the rest of my life. I just didn't know it yet. My father moved fast, like he had rehearsed it. Within 48 hours, a formal eviction notice for my apartment hand, delivered by a Harrington Capital property manager. I had known for 6 years. He couldn't look me in the eye. The company car recalled the next morning. A driver showed up, took the keys, drove it away while I stood on the sidewalk holding a box of books. 2 days later, a letter, health insurance, terminated effective immediately. He didn't just cut me off. He dismantled me systematically, piece by piece. Now, I need to tell you about 2 things I didn't understand at the time, but would come to matter more than anything. The first is my grandmother, Margaret Whitfield. My mother's mother was 79, a retired literature professor, and the only person in my family who ever saw me as a human being, instead of a line item. She lived in a small cottage outside Burlington, Vermont. White clapboard, blue shutters, a garden that smelled like lavender. I used to visit every summer. She made chamomile tea in a ceramic pot from Portugal, and talked to me like I had thoughts worth hearing. When I was 16, she pulled me aside one evening and said something I carried for years without understanding. "Your father married into my daughter's kindness and turned it into capital. Don't let him do the same to you." She paused. "There is something I have set aside for you, for when you are ready to be free." I thought it was just grandmother wisdom. The kind of thing old people say, that sounds important, but doesn't land when you are 16. The second thing is Caleb's workshop. A few months into dating, I visited his studio in Somerville, a converted warehouse with 20-foot ceilings, and the smell of fresh-cut oak, blueprints on every wall, photographs of restored buildings, a courthouse, a Victorian mansion, a 200-year-old church in Newport. But I also noticed something else. A stack of unopened envelopes on a side table, bills, a collection notice from a lumber supplier. The remnants of his bankruptcy, still following him like a shadow. He couldn't shake. There was a yellow sticky note on his desk that said $14,200, due the 15th of November. I pretended not to see it, but I saw it. I noticed a framed letter on his desk from the Boston Historical Society. I didn't read it. It felt private. "Just some projects," Caleb said when he caught me looking. I loved him for who he was in front of me. I never thought to ask about the rest, not the debts, and not the letter. Both the grandmother's promise, and that workshop, the mess and the masterwork, would matter enormously. I just didn't know it yet. 3 days after the eviction, I sat on the floor of Caleb's apartment surrounded by 3 boxes. Clothes, my laptop, a few photos, the crumpled drawing from when I was 12. Caleb sat down next to me. He didn't say "I am sorry" or "it will be okay," he said. You don't have to fight him, but you don't have to disappear either. I am done disappearing. So what do you want to do? I want to stop being an asset. I want to be a person. He was quiet for a moment. Then, build your own table. I laughed. For the first time in weeks, the next morning, I called Margaret. She answered on the second ring, like she had been waiting. It is time, sweetheart. Come to Vermont. I drove up that Saturday, 3 hours on I-89, October foliage burning gold on both sides of the highway. She was already on the porch, tea in hand. She took me inside. Same kitchen table, the one with the chip from when I was 9. And she told me everything. There was a trust. $4.2 million, established the day I was born. My mother had set it up quietly, using money from Margaret's side of the family. Money that predated the marriage. Money Richard had no claim to. Margaret pulled a folder from a fireproof safe behind her bookshelf. Your mother called me the day she found out she was pregnant with you, Margaret said. She was already afraid, not of motherhood, of what Richard would turn it into. She paused. And then she told me something that reframed everything I thought I knew about my family. Your mother went through the same thing, Elena. My late husband, your grandfather, he controlled every dollar in our house. I couldn't buy groceries without asking. I couldn't visit my own sister without permission. When your mother was 20, she left home and married the first man who offered her an exit. She thought Richard was freedom. Margaret's voice was steady, but her hands were not. She walked into the same house, with a different address, and a bigger mortgage. And by the time she realized it, she had you, and Connor. And no way out. That didn't mean losing you both. I stared at her. 3 generations. The same pattern. The same cage with different wallpaper. She said to me, Mama, help me build something Richard can never touch. So I did. Every year, a little more. Interest, dividends, careful investments. 4.2 million. It is yours. It has always been yours. The condition, I had to be living independently from Richard's control. I held that folder, heavy, real, decades of quiet resistance, pressed between manila covers, and felt something crack open inside my chest. Now, there is one more thing. Caleb didn't know about the trust. But in the days after the gala, I started seeing him more clearly. His company, Mercer Restorations, LLC, wasn't a side project. Revenue of $2.1 million the previous year, 12 employees, carpenters, restorers, an apprentice from a vocational program in Roxbury. Clients, the Boston Historical Society, the Newport Preservation Society, 3 museums. The framed letter on his desk. A signed contract. $1.8 million for the restoration of the Old South Meeting House. He had built all of it after going bankrupt, after losing everything, and starting over with nothing but his hands and his reputation. The bills on his desk, the collection notices, the $14,200. Those were the last echoes of the old failure. He was paying them off, methodically, one by one, while simultaneously running a company that restored million-dollar buildings. That is who Caleb was. He didn't hide the mess. He didn't pretend the struggle never happened. He just kept building. He never told me because he never needed to prove anything, and I never asked because I had been so focused on what my father thought about him that I forgot to see who he actually was. Before we move on, I have a question for you. What do you think happened next? Did my father back down? Did it get worse? Drop your guess in the comments. Let me tell you what really happened. What happened next wasn't something I planned in a single evening. It took 6 weeks, and it almost didn't happen at all. The week after the gala, my father's attorney, a man named Gerald Pace, from one of the most aggressive firms in Boston, sent a letter to Margaret, a formal challenge to the trust. Richard claimed the funds were marital assets that should have been disclosed during the marriage, that they had been hidden, intentionally, to defraud him. It was a scare tactic, the kind of legal letter designed to make you panic and surrender before you even consult a lawyer. Margaret didn't panic. She called Patricia Dove, her own attorney, 72 years old, retired twice, and came back both times because she got bored. Patricia responded within 72 hours with 40 pages of documentation, proving every dollar in the trust, predated the marriage by more than a decade. Bank records, transfer logs, tax filings. A paper trail so clean, it looked like it had been built specifically for this moment, because it had. The challenge was withdrawn. But it told me something important. My father wasn't just angry, he was scared. Scared of what he couldn't control. Scared of what it meant that his wife, his mother-in-law, and his daughter had all operated outside his knowledge for decades. 6 weeks after the gala, Richard hosted another event, the Harrington Capital Investor Reception. The Four Seasons, Boston, 80-plus people, investors, city planners, a journalist from the Globe. Richard announcing a new waterfront development. He needed fresh capital. I arrived uninvited. Margaret was with me. But here is what I haven't told you. 2 days before the reception, I made a phone call to David Chen, founder of Chen Development Group, one of the most respected names in New England preservation. David was already on the guest list. I told him about Caleb. I told him the truth, all of it. The bankruptcy, the rebuild, the contracts, David said. I know Mercer Restorations. We have been trying to book them for 2 years. That phone call changed everything. We walked in through the main entrance, no announcement. Just 2 women in simple black dresses. The room was beautiful white tablecloths, crystal stemware, architectural renderings on the projection screen. Classic Richard. It took him 90 seconds to notice. He crossed the room, controlled. What are you doing here? You are not welcome. I am not here as your daughter. I am here as an investor. Murmurs across the nearest tables. I stepped toward the center of the room, away from my father, toward the projection screen showing his waterfront renderings, and addressed the crowd. My voice was calm. I had rehearsed this in my head 100 times, but standing there, I didn't need the rehearsal. The truth doesn't need practice. My name is Elena Harrington. Some of you were at my father's gala 6 weeks ago. Some of you watched him disown me in front of 60 people because I chose to date a carpenter. Dead silence. Every eye in the room. A waiter stopped mid-step, tray suspended. I would like to introduce that carpenter, and then I would like to tell you what my father didn't know and still doesn't about the people in his own family. Caleb stepped forward from near the doorway. Clean suit, calm face. Hands at his sides, the same calloused hands my father had looked at with contempt 6 weeks ago. And that is when the room shifted. David Chen's silver hair, navy pocket square, stood from the third table. Caleb Mercer, he said, loud enough for surrounding tables to hear. Your team restored the federal building on Kennedy Plaza in Providence. $2.3 million worth of masterwork. I have been trying to get you on the phone for 6 months. 3 other people recognized Caleb. A museum director from the MFA, an architect from Newport, a woman from the Berkshires who had hired him to restore a 5-generation farmhouse. I turned to my father, confusion, recognition, and something I had never seen on Richard Harrington's face, fear. The man you called nobody, I said, went bankrupt at 25, rebuilt from nothing, and now runs a $2.1 million company. He restores buildings that have stood for 200 years. He builds things that last. Can you say the same? Richard opened his mouth, closed it. For the first time in my life, I watched my father search for words and come up empty. Then Margaret stepped forward. The room went quiet, not just quiet, but still, like the air itself was listening. My grandmother was 79 years old, 5'3", silver-haired, and she commanded that room with nothing but her voice and her posture. No title, no empire, just the quiet authority of a woman who had been waiting decades for this moment. Richard. Her voice was clear, unhurried. You married my daughter and turned her kindness into a balance sheet. 1 step closer. Her heels clicked once on the marble floor. You tried the same with my granddaughter. Another step. But I made a promise to my daughter before she lost her voice in your house. Before she stopped fighting you. Before she stopped believing she had the right. She turned to the room, 80 people holding their breath. Elena has an independent trust, $4.2 million, established the day she was born. Your attorney already tried to challenge it last month. He failed. The documentation is airtight. Every dollar predates your marriage by a decade. She looked at Richard. Elena doesn't need your empire, she never did. You just needed her to believe she did. Richard went white. Not red-white. The color of a man watching his own architecture collapse from the inside. That money. He turned to my mother, standing near the bar, with an untouched glass of wine. Victoria, you knew. My mother looked at him. For the first time in their entire marriage, she didn't look away. She didn't smooth it over. She didn't whisper something soothing. I went around you, because you would have taken it. The way you take everything. Silence. I could hear ice settling in glasses, the air conditioning humming above us. Richard straightened his jacket, tried to find the version of himself that ran boardrooms. This is a private family matter. You made it public at your gala, in front of 60 people, with champagne and a microphone. I am just finishing the conversation. I let the silence work. Then I spoke, not loud, not emotional, just clear. I don't want your company. I don't want your money. I don't want your name on my life anymore. I held his gaze. 60 seconds of eye contact that felt like a lifetime. I am not broken. I was never broken. You just couldn't see me past your own reflection. I turned. Caleb took my hand. Margaret walked beside us. The room remained frozen. I could feel 80 pairs of eyes on our backs. Not pitying, not scandalized. Something else. Something that felt, if I am being honest, like respect. Near the door, David Chen pushed back his chair. Miss Harrington, when you are ready to talk business. Here is my card. 2 other people stood. One, the museum director from the MFA, caught Caleb's arm and pressed a business card into his hand. Call me Monday, she said quietly. We have a project that needs your team. Another man, someone I didn't recognize, stopped Margaret. Mrs. Whitfield, your granddaughter is remarkable. Margaret smiled. I know, she gets it from her mother. We walked into the October night, cold, clean air, stars visible above the harbor. My grandmother squeezed my arm once. Firm, the same grip she had used when I was 16, and she had told me to keep the documents. How do you feel? She asked. Terrified, I said, and free. Good, she said. That is exactly how it is supposed to feel. Nobody needed to follow us. Nobody needed to apologize. The truth had done its own work. That night, I went to Caleb's workshop, small desk in the corner, next to a lathe and a half-finished oak cabinet. Cedar shavings and linseed oil. A single overhead light casting warm shadows across tools hanging on the wall. Chisels, hand planes, coping saws, each in its place. I sat down and signed the papers. 3 documents. Declination of any Harrington capital inheritance. Legal separation from all Harrington financial instruments. And activation of Margaret's trust. The pen smelled like cedar. I don't know why that detail stays with me, but it does. Caleb sat across from me, sanding a piece of reclaimed pine. He didn't watch me sign. He didn't make it a moment. When I set the pen down, he looked up and said, You want tea? That was enough, but it wasn't clean. Nothing ever is. The following week, my father's attorney filed a second motion, this time, claiming the trust activation constituted a breach of a family financial agreement from 2015. It was aggressive, designed to stall, not to win. Margaret's lawyer, Patricia Dove, a woman who had handled trusts for 40 years and had zero tolerance for intimidation, dismantled it in 3 days. The 2015 agreement referenced only Harrington-originated assets. Margaret's trust was entirely separate. Premarital. Documented. Untouchable. He is grasping. Patricia told me over the phone. Let him grasp. It makes him look desperate in front of the court, which he is. While the legal theater played out, my father called me 14 times in 48 hours. The first messages were commanding. Call me back, Elena. This has gone far enough. By message 8, the tone shifted, shorter, less certain. By message 14, left at 11:40 at night, his voice sounded different, smaller. Like someone had taken the authority out of it and left just the man. You have made your point. Come home. We can discuss this. I listened to it once, deleted it. Set my phone face down on the nightstand. He called Margaret. You poisoned her against me, Margaret. No, Richard. You did that yourself. Every report card you dismissed, every graduation you ignored, every dinner where you treated her like furniture. I didn't poison her. I gave her a parachute. 3 days later, I sent one message to the family group chat. I love you. But I will not be controlled anymore. If you want me in your life, you know where I am. But I will not come back to that table. Not on those terms. My mother read it immediately. 3 dots appeared and disappeared 4 times. Connor read it. Didn't reply for 3 days. My father never opened it. Connor told me later, Dad saw the preview. He set his phone down, walked into his study, and closed the door. Some doors are harder to open from the inside. What happened after that night didn't just change me. It changed everyone. And not all of it was pretty. Here is what happened in the weeks and months that followed. Some of it was satisfying. Some was painful. Most was both. Within 2 weeks, Harrington Capital lost 2 major investors. What those 80 people saw wasn't just a family argument. It was a man whose judgment they couldn't trust. If Richard Harrington couldn't treat his own daughter with basic dignity in a room full of witnesses, what else was he hiding? What other blind spots lurked behind that polished facade? The waterfront project, his crown jewel. 18 months of courting investors, delayed indefinitely. 3.2 million in committed capital, pulled back within a month. The city council liaison quietly stopped returning Richard's calls. The society pages ran a blind item. Which Boston patriarch lost more than a daughter at his own party? Everyone knew. Richard hired Keene and Associates' $12,000 a month retainer. They couldn't fix a reputation. Reputations, unlike buildings, cannot be renovated. 3 months later, Caleb and I moved into a brownstone in Cambridge. 2 bedrooms, a small yard, a workshop in the basement. The floorboards creaked. The kitchen was too small. It was ours. I started my firm. Whitfield Advisory, my grandmother's maiden name. First client. David Chen's Development Group. Your father's good at talking. David told me over lunch. Caleb's good at building. I know which one I trust. Caleb's business kept growing. Boston Magazine ran a profile. The Carpenter restoring history. He hated the attention. Did the interview because his 12 employees deserved the recognition. We built our life with hands and spreadsheets. No golden cage required. Now let me tell you about Connor. His story surprised me most. 3 months of silence. Then a Tuesday evening phone call. I was making pasta in our kitchen. I almost didn't answer Elena. His voice was thin, stripped of bravado. The Connor I grew up with, the golden child, the heir, the one who smirked during the gala, was gone. I watched Dad do to you what he has been doing to me. I just didn't have the guts to say it. I waited. He puts me in a room and tells me I am in charge. Then he makes every decision, and if I push back, he reminds me everything I have came from him. Then he said something I didn't expect. I used to hate you, Elena. Not for anything you did, for what you represented. When you turned down the analyst role, when you sent back James's ring, I told myself you were being difficult, ungrateful. But that is not what it was. You were free. You had always been free, and I was jealous. He paused. I could hear him breathing. The unsteady kind, the pauses where he swallowed hard. Every time Dad praised me for staying, for being loyal to the family, I knew what he really meant. He meant I was obedient. And every time I saw you walk your own path, it reminded me I had chosen the cage. I hated you for the freedom I was too afraid to take. I am sorry, he said, for the smirk at the gala, for every time I stood behind Dad and watched him hurt you, and said nothing. I was his weapon, Elena, and I let him use me. You were also his prisoner, I said. That doesn't excuse it, but it explains it. Then say it now, I told him. Not to me, to yourself. He started therapy. Dr. Kessler, Back Bay. He didn't leave Harrington Capital, not yet, but he set boundaries, leaving before midnight, declining weekend calls, questioning decisions in board meetings for the first time in his career. The first time he pushed back on a budget allocation, Richard stared at him across the conference table for 10 full seconds. Connor held his ground. He told me later his hands were shaking under the table, but his voice stayed level. He wasn't ready to leave, but he was ready to see. And sometimes, that is the step that matters most. My mother's path was slower. 4 months after the showdown, a handwritten letter arrived. 4 pages, front and back, cream stationery from her writing desk, the only furniture in the house my father hadn't chosen. It smelled like Chanel No. 5. She apologized. Specifically for every time she looked away. Every dinner, the graduation, the engagement, the drawing on the refrigerator. I knew who threw it away, she wrote. It was your father. I should have put it back. I should have put it in a frame. I was afraid of him. That is not an excuse. It is just the truth. And then this, the part that changed how I understood everything. My own father did the same thing to me, Elena. Your grandfather controlled every dollar your mother touched until she was 20. When I married Richard, I thought I was escaping. I walked into the same house with a different address and a bigger mortgage. That is why I set up the trust. Not because I was brave, because I recognized the pattern, and I was terrified you would inherit it too. We met at Tot in Harvard Square, marble tables, high ceilings. She looked older, thinner. She had been sleeping in the guest room for 2 months. She ordered a latte and held it with both hands, like she was cold even though it was May. We cried quietly, not the dramatic kind, the exhausted kind, the kind that comes when 2 people finally stop pretending. I should have left him when you were 12, she said. When he threw away your drawing. I stood in the kitchen and watched him do it, and I said nothing. Why didn't you? She looked at her coffee. Because I had nowhere to go. Because I was afraid. Because I told myself it was just a drawing. It wasn't just a drawing. No, she said. It wasn't. We started over, every other Sunday. Same caf, same table by the window. Some visits we talked about everything. Some we barely spoke. Both were necessary. Forgiveness isn't a moment. It is a series of small choices, made over and over, until the distance becomes something you can cross on foot. And my father, Richard Harrington, did not apologize. He told associates the situation was handled, gave an interview calling it a personal disagreement. But privately, the cracks widened. Another investor left in December, a Connecticut firm, $40 million. The managing partner called Richard directly. We have lost confidence in your judgment. Not the numbers. The character. Connor pushed back in board meetings. Victoria filed for legal separation in January, asked for her freedom, and a small apartment in Cambridge near her daughter. She hired her own attorney for the first time in the marriage. Richard was blindsided. He had never considered the possibility that Victoria would leave. She was supposed to be permanent, like the furniture. Connor told me our father sat alone in his office some nights, lights off, bourbon on the desk untouched, staring at the city through floor-to-ceiling windows that used to make him feel powerful, and now just made the room feel empty. He didn't reach out. Not to me, not to Margaret, not even to Connor. Not with an apology anyway. Only with instructions, demands. The same language he had always used, but the words didn't land the way they used to. The foundation had shifted, and everyone could feel it. I didn't wish suffering on him. I never did. But I stopped carrying his pain alongside my own. His consequences were his to sit with. My life was mine to build. That was the difference. That was everything. 6 months after the showdown, I found out I was pregnant. I sat in our kitchen on a Wednesday morning staring at the test and felt not fear, resolve. This child would not be measured against a balance sheet, would not audition for love. I told Margaret first, drove to Vermont on a Saturday, the same route I had taken 6 months before. The foliage was gone now, April. Everything green and new. She opened the door, took one look at my face, and knew before I said a word. She pulled me inside and held me in her kitchen for a long time without speaking. Then she cried relief, not sadness. The kind of crying that comes from decades of worry finally releasing. Your mother would be so proud, she said. She already knows, I told her. I called her this morning. Margaret smiled. Good. That is how it should be. Caleb built the crib. Oak, hand-carved, tiny stars along the rails, each one different. None perfectly symmetrical. Because that is how real stars are. He worked on it every evening after his crew went home, sanding each piece until you could press your cheek against it. He burned his initials into the bottom rail, a small CM, almost invisible, unless you knew where to look. I stood in the doorway watching him, sawdust in his hair, pencil behind his ear, completely absorbed in something he was building, not for a client, not for money, but for love, and I thought, my child will know what it means to be valued for who they are. Not for their utility, not for their last name, not for what they can produce. Just for being here. That was worth more than $200 million. That was worth more than anything today. I am sitting at my desk in our Cambridge brownstone. Sunday morning gold light through the east window striping the hardwood floor. Downstairs, Caleb in the workshop, the soft rhythm of a hand playing against oak. Sawdust floating in sunlight like tiny golden stars. He is working on a commission, a restored mantelpiece for a Victorian home in Marblehead. He will be at it for hours. He is happy. Whitfield Advisory has 4 clients. I work from home most days, in a room with bookshelves. Caleb built, and a window overlooking our small yard. The garden beds are planted tomatoes, basil, lavender, Margaret's influence. The ultrasound photo is on the refrigerator, held up by a magnet from a bookshop in Burlington. Next to it, a new drawing mine. A small house, a workshop, 2 people in a garden, a tree with wide branches, yellow windows. Nobody threw it away. Nobody will. 1 year after my father said, "Enjoy your poverty," I sat in a rocking chair Caleb made from reclaimed maple, and felt the baby kick for the first time. And I thought, this child will never audition for love. That is not a privilege I am granting. It is a baseline. It is what every person deserves. Here is what I have learned. About family, blood doesn't give anyone the right to own you. Real family is built, not inherited. It is built in workshops and kitchens and quiet evenings, where nobody keeps score. It is built by people who show up because they want to, not because they have to. About worth. You are not an asset. You are not a line item. You are not a merger opportunity or a strategic investment. You are a person, whole and complete. No spreadsheet in the world measures that. About freedom. The most expensive thing I ever owned was my silence. I carried it for years, and it cost me more than I can calculate in missed joy, in swallowed words, in nights wondering what was wrong with me when nothing was wrong with me at all. Letting it go was free. It just took courage. If you are watching this and someone measures your worth by what you can do for them, I see you. If you have been told your choices make you a disappointment, that loving the wrong person makes you less, I see you. If you are sitting in a golden cage right now, wondering if the world outside is as frightening as they have told you, it is not. It is wide and imperfect and full of people who will love you for who you are. Choosing yourself is not betrayal. It is survival. And sometimes, most times, it is the beginning of everything. Like that line from The Pursuit of Happiness, nobody gets to tell you what you cannot do. Not your boss, not your partner. Not even the people who raised you. Especially not the people who raised you. The people who love you will never ask you to shrink. And if they do, you were never small. They were just afraid of your height. Thank you for staying with me. It took me years to live this story, and 2 cups of tea to tell it. If it meant something to you, like and subscribe. I read every comment. Have you ever had to choose between family expectations and your own happiness? What did you do? What do you wish you had done? Tell me in the comments, I want to know. Check the description for more stories like this. Take care of yourself. You are worth it. You always were.